Welcome back to Newswire here on Sports Grid. We've got Sam McQuillan with us from Legal Sports Report. Really some big news in the Southeastern Conference and the way that they report some of their injuries. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, let's start off with some earnings reports news. And Sam, Penn is one of those companies that we've been following pretty closely from the days at Barstool to the new days at ESPN. It's one of those sports betting companies that I think people have an eye on because they want to know if they're going to be able to succeed in the industry. So thanks again for coming on the show, and let's get right to it.
Yeah, of course, Craig. Happy earnings season to you. It's been a really interesting one on this end, like you said, covering Penn, which has been just one of the most interesting companies over the last couple of years as it went from Barstool and then paid, I think, $2 billion almost for the ESPN brand. So investors have really been clamoring for when that investment is going to pay off. They bought it last summer, so it's almost a year that they have under their belts. But essentially what CEO Jay Snowden said on the earnings call today is that we'll just wait a little bit longer, wait until football season. That's when we're going to have all these big product enhancements, these integrations with ESPN. We're going to have it where if you bet a same game parlay on the ESPN Bet app, it'll automatically get tracked into ESPN's regular scores app that so many people use. It's going to use its fantasy football database that hosts so many different leagues and give customers personalized offers based off of maybe who's on their fantasy team. There's this whole kind of pie in the sky, big changes coming for ESPN Bet, but it's really a crucial time because you have a large portion of investors calling for Penn to sell the entire company, mainly because of its poor performance with sports betting, with online sports betting. So it's pretty tough for Penn to tell them to kind of keep waiting. It's a long-term investment when you pay all that money for something, and it takes a long time to get these product changes going, but they're kind of telling everyone just keep waiting. So in a couple of months, actually in less than a month, we'll really know whether they're on track to complete a lot of those things. College football season is right around the corner when ESPN Bet is going to launch in New York. Snowden came out and said today that they won't have a surcharge like DraftKings recently announced, which has been a really hot topic, the thing that's coming to high tax states like New York, but he wants to wait and see how it works out for DraftKings and didn't commit to having no surcharge in the future. So pretty interesting comments there. You've had other companies like Bet Rivers come out and say we won't have a surcharge, and we're still waiting on the rest of the industry. But the financials were a little bit better for ESPN this quarter, which was kind of to be expected after a really rough first quarter. So we'll have to see kind of what happens going into football season. We should have some more answers in just a few weeks.
All right. Now, the other big story that we've been talking about here all week long on Newswire, Sam, is DraftKings making the first big step among the sports betting operators to basically say, we don't like how much money we're being taxed in some states, and so therefore we want a bigger piece of the pie. Now, they didn't say that. I'm saying that, Sam. What they're saying is that we don't want a bigger piece of the pie, and we don't even want a slice. We just want a sliver. Is that fair to sports bettors to have to lose a sliver of their earnings?
Well, the good news for sports bettors is that this change is only coming in 4 states, and they'll actually get to decide whether or not it's fair. If you don't like the small, maybe 25-cent addition you're going to have to pay on some winnings in a few states, you can go over to another app like Bet Rivers, you go to another app like FanDuel, ESPN Bet. So DraftKings is really kind of going to be the test case for whether passing the tax, so to speak, down to the customer will work out. Now, Wall Street is pretty mixed on whether it worked out. Some investors are saying they could see a large portion of DraftKings' market share getting impacted by this, with the big fish customers, the ones that bet a lot of money, going over to other apps, because obviously if you have a fee and you're betting a lot more money, you're going to see the impact bigger there. Other investors think that maybe they can build up customer loyalty with the smaller, less price-sensitive customer that DraftKings has grown so accustomed to and has really grown to love and push parlays kind of down their throats. So DraftKings thinks that they can win on the product in this case, but you have some other investors coming out. One group, Regulus Partners in the UK, called it economically illiterate and published a review on it saying how to lose market share and undermine brand credibility all in one step. So you have the reaction from Wall Street really mixed as to whether or not this is going to be something that bettors, ignore, or if they move on to other apps. So we'll know if it spreads to other apps probably when FanDuel releases their earnings next week. A lot of people think whatever they say, the rest of the industry will follow. Obviously, FanDuel and DraftKings are two of the biggest players in the state. So it's another wait and see here, but really interesting development. And it's going to come in 2025. So that's when we'll know whether or not bettors think it's fair or not.
Now, college football is just a couple of weeks away. SEC football, I don't believe, is on the 24th of August. I believe it's the following week, Labor Day weekend, when they get started. And their sort of view of college football is going to be a lot different this year, Sam. You know, they've added teams to the conference. And what they've also added is an injury report. And people may be confused with this because, again, during the week when coaches talk, you sort of get an idea for who could be in or who could be out. But we've seen so many players, Sam, an hour or two before games being declared either ineligible to play for injuries or other reasons. And the Southeastern Conference is diving in and saying, hey, look, we're going to give you some updates and more detailed updates on this. Is it just for sports bettors?
Yeah, I don't think it's entirely for sports bettors, but it was really interesting in the reporting that CBS Sports did earlier this week, saying that mandatory injury reporting was going to come to the SEC, which would bring it in line with the Big Ten, which kind of started to do this last year. It was really interesting. They said that the changes revolved around betting concerns. You know, in sports like the NFL and the NBA, you have these injury reports that go beyond what the coaches say in the middle of the week. And bettors know who's going to play, who's not going to play. But in college football, a lot of that is really a mystery. And that's put a lot of the pressure on the student athletes. According to the NCAA, 15 to 25% of high profile college athletes receive some sort of abusive message related to gambling. So that's been a big priority for the NCAA. They actually considered adding injury reporting in 2018 after the Supreme Court allowed states to legalize sports betting. In lieu of that decision, adding injury reporting to create further transparency, especially because they make so much money off of the game as well. So obviously you want to be consistent with what you're putting out there and what you're getting from the sports books. But they actually declined to do it sort of at the last minute. It was a really weird situation. The Big Ten had really pushed for it, but then the NCAA seemingly at the last minute came out and said, you know what, we have concerns over sharing player data, player health, all this stuff when they're amateurs. That certainly didn't stop them from sharing that data with the sports books. They have a deal with Genius Sports that gets all the player tracking data. So now in this situation, if the SEC comes out, adds injury reporting, that would seem to add the kind of extra layer of protection between the athletes and the sports bettors out there, because this information is really invaluable when you don't have it publicly. And if the SEC does it, the Big Ten's already doing it. I'm sure the rest of the Power Five would likely follow. So it's nice to see this kind of no-brainer thing finally get done or close to be done from this standpoint. And it definitely has some big ramifications with sports betting.
Yeah, people would be paying more attention to that going into a game than they ever have been. Real quick, Sam, what did you make of the big fine given to Bet365? $500,000.
I thought it was just an example that you have to follow the rules. A lot of the time, sports books can adjust the payouts if there's an obvious error on odds. They do that in so many states. But New Jersey is one of the few where you have to get the permission first. So I think it's an example that, when you launch a new sports book, you have to follow every state's rules, not just kind of, think that there's a blanket protection for all states.
Yeah. In addition, got to be careful you're placing the right odds, not overjuicing things too. Get caught doing that as well. All right, Sam, great to catch up with you. Thanks again for coming on Newswire. We'll catch up with you again next week. Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks so much, Greg. Have a good one.